Welcome, everyone. As you know, my name is Fernando Parra. I'm the director of the Craig School of Business, Institute for Family Business at Fresno State. We serve as a comprehensive resource center for the Central Valley community of family businesses. We also serve as a nexus to connect our students with our family businesses in the area. And as part of our mission to serve as an educational center for our community, we're offering this webinar, Legislative Actions Impacting Family Business, in connection with Family Enterprise USA. We're very grateful to the IFB Advisory Board, including our chair, Sam Guile, who's here with us today, and our dean, Julie Olson Buchanan, who worked very diligently to make sure that our resources are provided to make sure these seminars are made possible. I'd like to welcome everyone today and turn the mic for a little bit to our chair, Sam Guile. Would you like to say a few words of welcome?
Well, you know, I have always liked the microphone, so that's not an issue. But people did not log on to hear me talk today. They logged on to hear Pat talk, so I'll be very, very short. But, I am short, but I'll be quick. Thank you, Pat, for taking time out on your busy schedule to be here today. Really appreciate it. Well, honored to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate being on.
Sure.
If I may introduce, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, and in closing, I'd like to thank our director, Dr. Fernando Parra Reyes, for hosting us in Fresno State School of Business. So thank you very much for having us, and welcome everybody, and thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. That's it.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. And I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker for today. Pat Soldano is the president of Family Enterprise USA, which promotes the growth of family businesses in the U.S. In addition, she's also the founder and president of Policy and Taxation Group, which works with national legislators to reform and repeal the gift, state, and generation skipping taxes. She is principal advisor to the Drucker School Global Family Business Institute, a member of the CSUF Family Business Center, and facilitates the Women's CEO Affinity Group. Ms. Soldano is on the Family Business Editorial Committee for Trust and State Magazine, and on the Investment Committee, Comp Committee, and Audit Committee for the Alzheimer's Orange County. Ms. Soldano received an MBA from Claremont Graduate School, the Drucker School, and a BA in Business Administration from Cal State University Fullerton. Pat Soldano has over 30 years of providing family office services. She developed the Simbrick Family Office Services into a multi-family office in 1996, and then sold it to Jen Springs Family Offices in January 2009, where she was managing director of the Western region for Jen Springs for 5 years, and then a family office consultant to Jen Springs until December of 2017. Ms. Soldano is now a family business and family office consultant working directly with families herself. And today we have the great pleasure of hosting her for this conversation. So welcome, Pat, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise with the rest of our membership.
Well, Fernando, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to address the group today. I will say the bio is probably a little old because I really don't do any consulting for family offices anymore, or family businesses. I'm pretty busy running Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. And it is truly a passion of mine. It's always been a passion of mine. Also on the call is John Gugliana, who is our Director of Strategic Partnerships and Business Development. Really appreciate him being on, especially since he's had a very long day today, driving to Maine and back and doing his own presentation. So appreciate that. And also appreciate Sandy Juranic for being on the call. Sandy actually worked with me at Simbrick for over 20 years. So great to have you guys join. I am going to, it's a long presentation. I tend to over communicate. I have a lot of slides, so bear with me. You don't need to read all the words on the slides. It's broken up into 3 parts. I'm going to talk about the family business survey that Family Enterprise USA is known for and has done since 2007. I'm then going to move on to legislative climate, where it is, what issues are affecting family businesses. And I'm going to close with voter attitudes toward the successful in this country that I think will surprise you. Throughout this presentation, you can ask me questions, just jump in. Don't be afraid to interrupt me. And Fernando, I'm not going to monitor the chat or the Q&A. So if you can do that for me, please do that and just jump in and ask me any questions. I will stop between the various sections. So if people have questions and they haven't asked them along the way, they can certainly have the opportunity to do that. So with that, let's just get started and talk about families. Family offices, family businesses certainly are at risk, and they are at risk from these legislative changes that severely and significantly, especially in 2022, could affect families and their businesses, as well as these voter attitudes and negative voter attitudes in this country toward the successful. There are critical issues facing families and family businesses, and those are tax and economic policies. And the Congress has been attempting to make those changes in this session of Congress. And again, this voter perception of the successful people in this country. Who is advocating for families and family businesses? Well, both organizations that I run on a daily basis, Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group, are advocacy organizations. Family Enterprise USA, as Fernando talked about, sole mission and purpose is to promote family businesses and their job growth in America. It's a really simple mission. It was formed in 2007 for that purpose. It is an advocacy organization. It works every day, all day long with members of Congress in Washington, D.C. doing that. And it is a 501c3 organization. Policy and Taxation Group is actually a 501c4 for all you tax accountants. And it is an organization that was formed to work exclusively on gift, estate, and generation skipping tax. But as the climate has changed in Congress, we have expanded that. And now we work on all tax and economic issues that affect families, family businesses, and family offices. So let's start by talking about how important family businesses are to this country. They are critically important. We did not know how to answer the questions of members of Congress around how many jobs do they create, how important are they to our economy. So we employed 7 professors, 3 of which are on the screen here, and we spent 7 months, and we learned that in fact, family businesses generate 59% of the jobs in this country, 84 million jobs. And they represent 54% of the GDP, so $7.7 trillion. So when you're talking to your member of Congress, you need to remind them of this. Tell them how important you are as a family business and how much you contribute to not only the community, but the economy. So I mentioned I was going to talk about our 2022 survey. It's a little dated now. We'll be in the field before you know it with 2023. 2022 started January 5th. And went through the end of February. So remember, we were during the pandemic. And so you'll see that reflected in some of the questions and some of the answers. We're very pleased to have BNY Mellon as our prime platinum sponsor of this survey. They really love what we do at Family Enterprise USA. And shame on us, we didn't even think about a sponsorship. They came to us and asked us if they could sponsor this survey. And they've been doing it every year. These are some of the organizations that support what we do and help us to distribute this survey. You can see some of the family business centers that are on the screen here. And in this page as well, you'll see trade associations like the National Farm Bureau or ACG, the Contractors Association, or the beer wholesalers, or the Coalition of Family Trade Businesses, the Family Business Estate Tax Coalition. So we have many people that help us to distribute the survey. But let's just get into the survey. Let's talk about the statistics. 90% of those that responded are CEO, chairman, senior management. And that's who we want to respond. This is the first time we asked this question, a very important question, because many family businesses operate as a pass-through organization. So that means that they're an LLC or a trust or an S Corp or an LP. Well, in fact, 79% of family businesses, if you do the math here, operate as a pass-through entity. Only 21% of them operate as a C Corp. So family businesses are still paying these 30 to 35% in taxes and income taxes, whereas corporate America gets to pay 21%. That's why things like 199A, which some of you are probably familiar with, is so important to family businesses because they are these pass-through entities. And again, another important statistic for members of Congress, because they still see us as a country of family farms. And of course, we're still a country of family farms, especially in the Central Valley here in California. But the fact is we have 24% of family businesses are in manufacturing, 10% in construction. You can see real estate, retail. The reason this is important for members of Congress to understand is these industries have the same illiquid nature of their assets that agriculture has, which is the illiquid nature of those assets and their business in general. So we don't want to forget when we're developing economic and tax policy, these other industries. Family businesses, as many of you know, operate for the long term. 75% of them have been in business over 30 years. And in fact, 50% of them have been in business over 50 years. So we know they plan their business for the long term as a legacy. Most of them that answer this survey tend to be on the medium to larger size. 32% of them have over 50 million in revenue. 15% have 21 to 50 million. And I think that's because family businesses reach a point generationally where they understand how important advocacy is. They realize that the laws are going to change in this country and they're going to impact their business as they get larger. Not that we don't have small businesses as well, we certainly do, but small businesses are usually busy running their businesses and many of them are first generation, so they're really not aware of the importance of advocacy. Those that answered this survey operate, 35% of them operate in 11 states or more, and 30% of them operate in 21 states or more. Another important statistic for members of Congress, family businesses pay better. They pay better in terms of salaries and benefits because they really understand and appreciate their workforce. This was during the pandemic, so this statistic this year is lower at 44% or above average. Last year, as you can see on this chart, 52% of them paid better, above average in terms of salaries and benefits. So again, a really important stat for members of Congress to understand. We all know that family businesses plan their business for sustainability. 85% of them say they do. And 79% of them say, yes, this business is a legacy for my children. But only 51% of them have actually passed the business to the next generation. And that's probably why you probably have workshops around succession planning, because succession planning is very important. Families struggle, everyone struggles with succession planning and passing this business on. And it is sad to see that only 35% have actually passed on full or even partial control, any kind of control to the next generation. And I just encourage you as a family business center to continue to work on helping family businesses do this. Really, for the business to survive from one generation to the next, it needs to have ownership, not only from a practical standpoint and operational standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint as well. That next generation needs to really have true skin in the game. And so it's really important that you pass on that true ownership. And also innovation, we've also learned through a lot of research, is what keeps a business alive from generation to generation. So since I mentioned that we've done this during the pandemic, let's talk about the impact of the pandemic. This is the difference with family businesses. And I was just on a call this morning in which I talked about this. This is the difference between family businesses and non-family businesses. 90% of family businesses kept their employees employed, even some of them that had to shut their doors. That's what they do. They understand and appreciate their workforce. Members of Congress need to know that so that they can help promote family businesses and not hurt us by increasing tax policy or income tax rates or other economic policies. 54% of these businesses actually added jobs in 2021 during the pandemic, and only 11% actually lost jobs. So in terms of the size of the businesses, 49% of them have 1 to 50 employees. So there's a little disconnect between the size of the business versus employees and the revenue. But 30% of them have more than 100 employees. What do they expect their revenue to be in 2022? Well, 89% of them expected their revenue to grow. And I suspect many of them did have that opportunity. And they expect that growth from the strategic business choices, second, economic conditions, and last, industry conditions. Family businesses give locally. Another important statistic for your member of Congress. 76% of their giving is local. So when that family business is sold for whatever reason, to pay the estate tax or for some other reason, that family loses their livelihood, as you all know, and the employees lose their jobs. But the community loses 76% of the giving. That's so important to local communities. It's the local YMCA or the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever you support. That goes away, and that is critical to the community. So let's talk about the risks and impediments. What a family business see as their top risk? They see the recession or the market turndown, and certainly availability of labor. We're going to talk about that next. Is at an all-time high. And then government regulations continues to really prevent them from doing what they need to do, which is grow and expand their businesses with those funds. But inflation wasn't even on the list before. And it's new to the list this year. We're all experiencing it. We just saw the inflation numbers this week. It looks kind of grim. Family businesses are all wrestling with how to deal with inflation. But this, as I mentioned, this talent, recruiting and retention, so important to family businesses. They're all struggling. I work with a women's CEO group out of Cal State Fullerton, Affinity group, and they tell me that they've had to pay up, increase wages, not only to their existing employees to keep them, but pay much higher wages to bring on new people. And yesterday we just conducted a webinar with Linda Mack of Mack International, and she talked about how recruiting and retention is harder than it's ever been in the 20 plus years that she's been working as a recruiter. The top tax policy is certainly income tax. I mentioned why I think that is. Family businesses pay their taxes, their income taxes, as a pass-through. So they're paying this 35, 37% or higher now, whereas corporate America is paying 21%. And estate tax is usually second or third on the list. It's second, but it's behind, quite a bit behind the income tax, but still an important tax priority because we all know that families and individuals pay the estate tax. We asked them what they would prefer around the estate tax. They would prefer repeal. Repeal is not in the economic or political climate today, so it's not a viable option, unfortunately. But it is possible that the lifetime exemption is going to become permanent, but it's going to be a huge struggle to get there. Remember that it expires in 2025. So if you have not used that lifetime exemption, which was just increased by the IRS, you really need to do that. It's an all-time high now at 12 million plus. And then 20% of them understand reducing the rate from 40% to 20% would be helpful. And in fact, through Policy and Taxation Group, we've helped members of Congress introduce bipartisan legislation because both groups that I work with and run and represent are bipartisan, have always been bipartisan, will always be bipartisan. It is critical to the success of this country as well as any change that we make in legislation. And we think a reduction in the rate of tax would really help all family businesses. And so we see that as a viable option. There is a bill in the Senate. Unfortunately, it's not bipartisan. That is a companion bill in the House. But I will say it hasn't much traction. It really hasn't gotten much co-sponsors, but that's mostly because it just doesn't seem to be on people's radar right now. Estate tax is not a significant issue in the minds of most members of Congress. Certainly right now, they're all worried about the midterm elections. These economic policies that they are worried about, once again, the top of the list is income tax. But look at what's number 2, reducing the federal deficit. Now that used to be at the bottom of the list. But remember, these are business owners. They understand what debt does to a business. So our government is not a business, and it's not run like a business. So they understand that this huge deficit that we are now facing, this debt that we took on, which was absolutely necessary through the pandemic, is really going to hurt us as a country, and we need to figure out how to deal with it. And then the estate tax is number 3, and then reducing government regulations is always on the list as well. So I want to thank BNY Mellon again for their sponsorship and their continued support on this survey. We really appreciate it. They've been a great partner. So I'm going to stop at this section and take questions. I do see there are some questions in the chat. So Fernando, do you want to manage that, or do you want me to just go there? We can't hear you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now. Sorry. So there are a couple of questions. One of them was, are we providing this presentation slides in the future? I think people are interested in getting these facts as well. Is that a possibility?
Yes, we will do that. I have sent this deck to you. You can send it out to those on the call. You could send it out to a broader universe, but I really would discourage that, only in that we don't want some of the slides, particularly the ones at the end that we've done with Frank Luntz, are proprietary. So I would just say, send it out, but please don't widely distribute for those of you on the call as well.
Wonderful. We'll do that.
So I think that was probably the end of the questions, right?
So far, that's it. Yes.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions they just want to ask before I move on?
We'll continue listening.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on because I can't hear you that well, Fernando. So let's move on to the legislation affecting families, family offices, and family businesses. And John Gugliano, if you haven't, you probably want to put in the chat or the Q&A your contact information. So if people do have questions after the fact, they can ask them. Go to our website. We have a lot of white papers, a lot of material, research work that we have done, and all of our years of surveys. You're all very welcome to look at. So let's talk. I'm sorry. Okay, let's talk about the legislative agenda. So this is the Green Book that President Biden came out with. These are just some of the things in the Green Book, but they happen to affect family businesses. This is similar to his Green Book last year. And it's some of these things were included in the Build Back Better Act. That's what the BBBA stands for. So the proposal would be to increase corporate taxes from 21 to 28%. There was also proposed raising individual income tax rates to as high as 39.6 for high income earners, which could affect family businesses. Capital gains tax increase could go as high as 39.6. That's what he proposed. Carried interest rule is really, for those of you who work with hedge funds, you know that the income from hedge funds is taxed at capital gains. The proposal would be to tax at ordinary income, as well as other organizations like hedge funds. And then repealing like-kind exchanges entirely, which would be pretty devastating to the real estate community. He proposed a tax on the wealthy, a wealth tax. He's not the only one that's proposed this. There are others in the Senate, Senator Warren, Senator Bernie Sanders, that have proposed a wealth tax. And you should all know that the voters actually support a wealth tax. 70% of voters in this country support a wealth tax. They're not sure what that means. They're not sure who the wealthy are. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but they just believe the wealthy aren't paying their fair share. They're going to change, his proposal also would be some limits on donor advised funds, because he believed that there's some abuses around these donor advised funds. And then a recapture of any depreciation that would not be straight line, and then repeal some of the fossil fuels incentives. Ultimately, what happened is all of these things on the screen were included in the Build Back Better Act in the House. Fortunately, we fought against these, as well as other organizations, certainly the trade associations as well, because we felt all of these would have substantially hurt family businesses in the country. Elimination of grantor trusts. We had the life insurance agents with us on this one, because life insurance policies, which are the only thing exempt from estate tax, would have been included, because they wouldn't be able to use grantor trusts anymore. They could use other vehicles, but they wouldn't have grantor trusts to put those life insurance policies in. Elimination of valuation discounts for non-business assets, which could include family businesses. This is an issue that continues to be a problem. Family businesses justifiably and correctly use valuation discounts to pass their businesses on to the next generation. They use minority interests or LLC interests, and they have lack of liquidity and the lack of marketability because they are LLC interests. They aren't marketable. They are minority interests. But the House wanted to eliminate that, and the Treasury, and we can talk about this later, is actually trying to eliminate it once again. Reduction in lifetime exemption from its current 12 million to down to 5. That was proposed. IRA, they would not allow any private stock to be held in an IRA. So if you held your family business stock in an IRA, you would have had to get it out of the IRA, and that would have cost you money, and then you'd have to hold it in some other entity. Reduction in 199A legislation, which is really just a band-aid to helping family businesses in the first place. Elimination of step up in basis, which I can talk about at length, but there's a reason that there is a step up in basis. It's because you pay a 40% tax on the full value of your assets, a full market value of your assets. You're not just paying a tax on the appreciation of those assets. That's why you get a step up. But most people don't understand it and think it is some sort of a loophole. So that was something that was included: increase in the estate tax rate, increase in income tax rates, and increase in capital gains tax rates. All of these were in the Build Back Better Act in the House. Fortunately, by the time it went to the Senate, they were taken out. But was not taken out and was in the Senate bill until the final minutes almost of the bill was this surtax of 10 million, of a 5% surtax if you make more than $10 million, which is, a significant income. The problem with that is that threshold for trust and estates was only $200,000. So if you held a family business in a trust and you had more than $200,000 in income, you were going to be paying another 5% of taxes on top of what you're already paying. And if you had $25 million as an individual, you pay another 3%. But for, again, trust and estates, that threshold was only $500,000. We fought really hard against these thresholds for trust and estates. Most people agreed with us because there was no logic. No one could really find any rationale behind why those thresholds for trust and estates were so different from the individual thresholds. And ultimately they were pulled out. But it's kind of a nuance that most trade associations didn't focus on, because you can appreciate in the 1,600-page document, this is not something that most people paid attention to. The other thing that was included, but ultimately excluded from the Senate bill, was this net investment income tax. So again, another tax on non-passive income of 3.8%. But what is non-passive income? Non-passive income is ordinary income. That's family business ordinary income. So another tax would have been imposed. Then the change in the carried interest, that was actually included until the 11th hour when Senator Sinema said, I'm not signing any bill if you change that. And elimination of accelerated depreciation, again, and elimination of like-kind exchanges, all were finally pulled out of the final bill. Now, you all heard through this process that the two people that were kind of in charge of the bill were Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema. Senator Sinema, Arizona Democrat, has said from the beginning she's not going to increase taxes on individuals, and individuals means family businesses because she understands the way they operate. So she's really been a supporter and been helpful. And Manchin similarly really wanted a small bill. He didn't want to spend a lot of money, and he was more concerned about energy. Both of them are Democrats that have been supportive of family businesses. So what was in that bill? What was in that bill was $743 billion. So it was significantly less than the multi-trillions that was originally proposed. And where it was going to come from was corporate America, the billionaires. If you made over $1 billion in income, you were going to pay a 15% corporate tax. That was going to raise $223 billion. Prescription drug negotiation, pricing, reform, $288 billion. IRS enforcement, hiring all the new agents, they believe is going to generate $124 billion. I'm not totally convinced of that, but that's what they believe. A 1% excise on repurchase of your corporate stock, $73 billion. And then this 2-year extension from 2025 to 2027 for pass-through loss limitations that could affect some family businesses. Ultimately, where that $743 billion is going to go to energy and climate change, $369 billion. And then the Affordable Care Act extension, $64 billion, and about 310 was going to go to reduce the deficit. So I don't know if you can all see this cartoon, but I think it's funny in that, you know, we've got this inflation looming, and this bill was called the Inflation Reduction Act. And my problem with DC, with both parties, is they call things that don't have anything to do with what the bill is actually about. This bill had nothing to do with inflation or reduction. So I just thought you might find this humorous. It's an alligator, and you have these people that are standing trying to hold up the mouth of the alligator so they don't get swallowed. And it says, finally, you know, help has arrived. And yet the help, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, actually is IRS agents saying, we're here to audit you. So what could be addressed in this lame duck session, or certainly in bipartisan support? We're not in the lame duck session. And obviously we all know the elections are just around the corner, but there are some things they could do together. The R&D amortization, bonus depreciation, some energy incentives. But I also want you to focus on things that can be changed by regulation. Not all laws are made by our Congress. As I mentioned earlier, our Treasury can change by regulations, valuation discounts. They can put limits on grantor trusts. They can change some of the estate tax rules, 199A, maybe the partnership rules. And Secretary Yellen has already said, and I'm not making a political statement here, that she really does not support valuation discounts. And so we are concerned that that will happen. So we have to pay attention to what the Treasury is doing, not just what Congress is doing.
And Pat, for those that are non-accountants, would you mind expanding a little more on valuation discounts?
Sure. So valuation discount, and probably more relates to estate attorneys, is a lot of families use LLCs, S corps, as I mentioned earlier, LPs, because you're going to gift away a minority share, whatever that is, whether it's an LLC or LP interest or an S corp interest. You have lack of marketability and lack of liquidity that you get a discount for. And that discount can range from 10 to, let's say, 30, 35%. And you have to determine what that discount is. You usually hire some sort of valuation expert to help you determine what that lack of discount should be for that particular asset for a lack of marketability or a lack of liquidity. Has nothing to do with the state tax, has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that if you're using a structure that is a minority interest and you're gifting that minority interest, it doesn't have marketability or liquidity, and therefore you should get a discount. And so when you're going to pass it on to the next generation, you're going to pay less of a gift tax because it is a minority interest. So that is a tool that a lot of families use, not just to get the valuation discount, but to pass on their business, because many of them, as I already showed you, don't want to pass on control. And this, you don't have to be a family business to get a valuation discount. I mean, it's based on the structure of the asset and the structure of the entity you hold it in, not anything to do really with estate tax or anything like that. Does that explain
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So since estate tax is important to families and family businesses, because individuals pay the estate tax, I mentioned that Policy and Taxation Group worked with members of Congress to get a bill introduced. It is bipartisan. Jody Arrington of Texas is a Republican, and Congressman Cuellar of the Democrat have introduced this bill. They're both fantastic to work with. And, you know, we wish it had more co-sponsors. It just hasn't had the traction we like to see, but it would reduce the rate from 40% to 20%. And that companion bill in the Senate, as I mentioned, is with 2 Republican senators. Unfortunately, we've yet to get a Democrat on that bill. There is a repeal bill on estate tax in the House and Senate. Senator Thune introduced the repeal bill, and Jason Smith in the House introduced his repeal bill. These bills are going nowhere. As I mentioned earlier, there is no economic or political climate for estate tax repeal. Again, not making a political statement, that just is what it is. There are a lot of co-sponsors on both these bills, but they're all Republicans. I mentioned elimination of step up. There is 2 bills have been introduced in the House and the Senate. Step up and basis elimination. These didn't go anywhere. They were introduced as long ago as March of 2021, but it was very, very concerning for us because it continues to be discussed, and it was part of the Build Back Better Act. So let's talk about the midterm elections. I'm assuming that that's on people's minds since it's like 3 weeks away. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around this. I have no better crystal ball than anybody else. Everyone knows the Democrats do control the House. It is a slim majority right now, and the Democrats control the Senate, obviously, and the White House. It is a 50-50 split, so it's a tight control. But the Republicans happen to control most of the governorships. Some of the key issues in this election, certainly the state of the economy. I think inflation is playing a bigger role than maybe people expected. The president's approval rating, while it's gone down to an all-time low, it has come back up. So I think it's in the 40s right now, which is a good thing for him and for the the Democrats in midterm election. Typically in midterm elections, the party that holds the White House doesn't win, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. The others is legislative successes or failures. You can define those. The Democrats did have a success because they got a Build Back Better Act through House and Senate and signed into law. It was much watered down than what they had hoped, but they did have that success. And then you have this issue around candidate quality. If most of you don't know, there are Democrats that are funding some of the extreme right Trumpers, thinking that's going to backfire, hoping that's going to backfire. And then fundraising, and I'm going to show a slide in a minute. Democrats have raised twice as much money as Republicans have raised. And then voter turnout. Voter turnout in midterms tends to favor Republicans if you look at history. And so this is what I talked about earlier. Historically, the president party loses in the midterm elections. You don't necessarily need to see the details on the slide. Some of those key states in the House, you can see on the screen, certainly Pennsylvania, Maryland, Arizona, and Iowa. This is an old slide. It's a couple of weeks old, so it could be different. It could dramatically be different, but those are key states. And here's some that you might want to pay attention to. Here in California, you see there's quite a few on the slide. Garcia seems to be leading. Valadeo, which I think is up in your district. I think that's a very tight race. I think he's ahead at this point, I think. And you can see the rest of them. In the House, there are more Republicans leading than there are Democrats leading. But that's the opposite in the Senate. There are more Democrats leading in the Senate than there are Republicans. All of these are going to be tight races. And I was on a call with my DC team this morning, all 10 lawyers, which I do every week. And I asked them about the Arizona, because Arizona is a very interesting state. You know, if Mark Kelly wins in Arizona, does that mean that O'Halloran, who's also in Arizona and in a tight race, does that mean that he's going to win? And they said, no, they're totally different dynamics going on there. But the key states in the Senate truly are Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, Pennsylvania, not all of which are on this screen. And you've been watching the news, so you know what those are about. And then in the House, the key states are California, Virginia, New Jersey, Texas. I think it's, anyone's guess at this point where everything is coming out, but it should be I think it'll be a good turnout. I don't know about you all, but I've never seen so many yard signs and signs on street corners ever, I think, in any election. So I think it will be, I'm hoping we're going to have a good turnout. I want to talk about Ways and Means, because Ways and Means is a very important committee. That's where all tax and economic policy starts. And so whoever runs it is very important. And unfortunately, Kevin Brady is leaving. He was an amazing co-chair. Current co-chair is Richie Neal. Richie Neal, of course, the Democrats control the House, so they control Ways and Means. Richie Neal is actually a good chairman in that he is very positive. I think he understands business. He's a former business owner himself. And he and Kevin Brady work very well together. So it's too bad that Kevin's leaving. Most people believe that the Republicans are going to take over the House, not as big a margin as they did months ago. It may be a much smaller margin. And if they take over the House, Kevin McCarthy will be the speaker. Most people say that. It's interesting that Republicans say that Democrats are going to take over the Senate, and Democrats say Republicans are going to take over the Senate. So I think the Senate's anybody's game. But what is important to think about in the Senate is if the Democrats pick up 2 seats, which is very possible, they don't need to worry about Senator Manchin or Senator Sinema anymore, who have kind of been a thorn in their side. So they could probably get a lot more done. But back to the Ways and Means here, since I'm on that slide. There are 3 potential chairs for Ways and Means. Everybody's thinking right now is probably the guy in the middle here, Adrian Smith of Nebraska, will probably be the chairman. Second in line is probably Jason Smith, and then Vern Buchanan. But it could be any one of them. Could be the chairman at this point. So let's talk about the lame duck session. If the lame duck session results in a GOP sweep of both chambers, and I don't know the odds of that, the GOP will probably kind of hold its powder until 2023. They can really get some things done. If the GOP only takes the House, there's going to be more incentive to work together to get something done during the lame duck session. And if the Democrats take over both chambers again, then they're going to try and get something done before the end of the year so they can show what they've achieved in this session of Congress. So now I'm going to talk briefly about what we are working on. And John Gugliana knows this well because he talks about it a lot. The Congressional Family Business Caucus is something we think is very, very important and doesn't exist today. Shame on us, we didn't know that. Members of our team suggested that there should be a caucus for family business, but this has to be formed by Congress. So we are working with members of Congress. We've identified 100 that actually own and operate family businesses. And we've gone to them and said, we'd love you to form a caucus. We'll help you do it. We'll do all the work. We'll organize it. We'll fund it. We'll do all the events. Basically you just need to show up and you need to, listen to what our family businesses have to say. We would bring members of Congress, family business members to the caucus meetings in the events and talk about their businesses and their challenges. It is not a policy organization. We're not going to be a caucus that takes policy, even though some do. We think it's important, very important, that it be bipartisan. And we wanted to educate. We want to support the landscape from members of Congress as well as family businesses. We want them to understand what family business is about, because with my thousands of meetings I've had with members of Congress, they don't know. They really don't know. Every time I say family business, they say small business. They don't really understand that there are small, medium, and large size businesses, and they need to think about all of them. And they need to think about all of their structures and all of their objectives and challenges. And so we think this organization will do exactly that. And we have identified chairs in the House and the Senate. We have yeses. We're not announcing it yet because we don't have it. We're not doing the press release until after the election, but we have co-chairs in the House, both Democrats and Republicans, and we're very excited about that. So I'm going to move on to the next section unless there are questions.
And feel free to unmute yourself if you like to ask a question from Ms. Soldano. Now I'm watching the chat as well.
Okay, I'm assuming there's no questions, so I'm going to move on to the last section. I promise. I told you there was a lot of slides. I wasn't kidding. So let's talk about the attitudes of taxes on the wealthy. And when you think about the wealthy, you should really thinking of the word successful, because that's what voters think about. Anyone that's successful, they see as wealthy. And that means family businesses. That means everyone. And they just don't understand. What we have learned is they do understand generationally owned family business. I was really pleased with this because I think voters get that if they work for a generationally owned family business, they're going to have a job generation after generation. And many of our members have multi-generational employees in their businesses, which is really amazing when you think about it. So we have changed all of our language. We tell members of Congress, don't call it small business, don't call it family business, don't call it medium-sized business. Look at these other terms on the screen here. A business that represents the American dream. That doesn't really resonate with members of with the voters. What resonates is a generationally owned family business built on hard work. So that is the language we use. And then when we asked them, and we did this work last August, Frank Luntz and I conducted this work. We spent a lot of time on the questions. There's actually 100 slides. I'm only going through about 10 of them, but we feel it's some of the best work we've done in 25 years that we've worked together. And we got some amazing data like this. The voters get it. What they want the tax code to protect is a lifetime of savings. They don't want to protect a nest egg or life's work or even earned success. And look where family business and small business are on this list. They want to protect a lifetime of savings. You guys know that. You are the ones that create that lifetime of savings. I put this slide in here because I want you to understand where the country is before I show you the next slides. It is very, very sad to me that 42% of Americans believe America is an exceptional country. Only 42% of Americans. And in fact, 40% of Democrats believe America has failed its people. So you all know we have extreme right and extreme left now. That is the country we're dealing with. We don't have moderates. We hope that's growing. We think that's growing. We believe the primaries are a way for moderates to really express themselves more, and that seems to be happening. But we really need to pull ourselves together as a country. And the voter, this is where they were. Now, granted, it's over a year ago, but this is very disturbing. So getting to the issue of the successful, the wealthy in this country, which we hear so much about, especially from our media, we asked, do you agree that the wealthy are not paying their fair share? Now, they don't know who wealthy is. They don't know what fair share is. They don't know any of that. But 71% of Americans say the wealthy are not paying their fair share. In fact, 86% of Democrats, and that may not come as a surprise to you. But then we said, okay, if you don't think they're paying their fair share, what do you think they should pay? What should the top 10% of income earners in this country pay? So what should the top 10% of Americans, income earners, pay as a percent of all the taxes? And they said, well, they should pay 35% of the income taxes. So the top 10% of Americans should pay 35% of the income taxes in this country. And then we said, okay, well, did you know that the top 10% of earners in this country actually pay 71% of all the federal taxes, not 35 that you said they should pay, but they actually pay 71% of all of the taxes. What do you think about that? Do you think that's fair? And 59%, look at the box on the left, 59% said, well, that's about right, or they actually should pay more. So we're not going to change those attitudes. You cannot talk about fair share anymore. You cannot talk about the wealthy in any positive context, because the voters, they don't know what it means, but they just know they don't pay their fair share. And I think, I'm speculating here, but I think that's because it started in 2008. We all know people suffered. People suffered a lot. And now with the pandemic, people suffered. And we did this kind of at the middle of the pandemic. People are suffering, and they see people at the top, even those that have created all their own wealth, like the Jeff Bezos and the, Elon Musks and the Bill Gates of the world, doesn't matter. They just are envious because so many of them, I think, are suffering themselves. So who's advocating for families and family offices and family businesses? Just so you are clear on this, trade associations do advocate, but they typically advocate for the issues of the business, not the family. So they're not necessarily going to work on trust issues or income tax issues or state tax issues. They're going to work on the business issues. Family business centers, you all know this, you're all part of one. They are your education workshops. We don't do education workshops. We advocate. We hope to be your advocacy arm. That's what we do for you. We don't do workshops on succession planning or anything that your center does. We need family business centers to send our survey out for Family Enterprise USA. And so we're really pleased to work with Fernando because he's been excellent in doing that. And we really appreciate his help. Family business consulting firms, they help you run your business. They help you plan it. They typically do not advocate for you in Washington, D.C. That's just not what they do. So what we focus on is understanding these voter attitudes that I talked to you about. We're trying to change those. And the question should be, how are we trying to change those? And the answer is very difficult. We are trying to change those kind of one family at a time by getting family businesses to tell their story on video. We have about a dozen of them now, and we have some more people that have offered to do their videos. We think if the voter can see the family business story and see what they've done, the jobs they've created, the good they've done to their community, they're going to understand what that successful means and what family businesses contribute. So it is a small step. We really believe those voter attitudes have to be changed in some way. So we try to educate not only them, but we try to educate members of Congress by shifting the discussion and helping, as I mentioned, to change this attitude. So both organizations are advocacy organizations, as I mentioned, in Washington, D.C. We hope that you will support our work. We do really appreciate the work that you all do as a center and hope that we continue to be your advocacy arm. So with that, I will take any questions. I don't see any in the chat. So I'm hoping that someone will unmute and we can take some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pat. And one of the things that I wanted to ask is, in addition to participating on that yearly survey that we send out, how else can we get involved as a family business?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that, Fernando. You can get involved by meeting with your member of Congress. I don't care if it's state or local or national. Support the people that do what you want them to do, that have your beliefs and your values. And when you meet with them, the best thing as a family business to do is to bring them to your shop, bring them to your business. I don't care if you only employ 10 people. They want to see voters. They want to come and talk to your employees. Bring them to your organization, write them letters, send them emails, go to town hall meetings, go to meetings where you're going to see them. And oh, by the way, go up and talk to them. Don't just attend the meeting. Don't be afraid to say, I run a family business. I employ 20 people, and this is what's important to me. That's what they're there to do. Don't be intimidated by them, or don't be afraid. And if you go to a fundraiser, it's appropriate for you to tell that member of Congress, what is your issue? What are you concerned about? Be polite, be appropriate. Members of Congress, staff members work very, very hard. People in Washington, D.C. work harder than anybody I know. So just understand that. They get a lot of asks. So be specific in your ask. Say, I'm a family business. What I'm worried about is the income tax rates. So please, try to help us, try to lower those income tax rates. Or I want to take advantage of 199A, or I'm worried about step up and bake, whatever your issue is. Or maybe it's a regulation issue that your industry is facing. Don't be afraid to talk about it. But again, and realize that a fundraiser, you're going to have the 30-second elevator speech. They don't have long times to talk to members. But you can go to fundraisers, and if you really believe in your member of Congress or your politician that you're working with, even if it's your city, don't be afraid to write a check, even if it's a small check. It does make a difference. They do need money to be supportive. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to support your issue. But if you believe in them, you should do that.
Absolutely. Wisely said. One of the things that struck me the most about your presentation, which was actually very informative, Pat, thank you very much for sharing that with our members, is how incredibly connected family businesses are with our nonprofit community, right? Everything that happens in our community, the fabric of who we are as a city, as a county, really comes from family businesses that choose to stay involved, that make their cities and their communities matter, and that is irreplaceable. That connectedness, those roots that we have in caring for the community we have, because we know if everybody's thriving, our businesses are going to thrive as well. And so I think that's something that needs to be more amplified and more highlighted as we talk to our legislators.
Yeah, it's so an important point. And they don't think about that. Family businesses, as you saw in my survey, 76% of their giving is local. It's critical to the community. So don't be afraid to tell your member of Congress that, because I guarantee you they don't know that. Of these statistics that I've shared with you today, I usually have limited time when I'm talking with a member. The meetings are usually 15 minutes or so, but I share those statistics all the time. Jobs, GDP, how much they support their community. It's really important, and they're always surprised. They don't know it. So, you really need to do that. You really need to make sure they understand your commitment, not only to your employees, but also to your community.
How can we connect as researchers with your enterprise USA, with your center, to participate in more family business centric research? Beyond the surveys, that you welcome some of that research collaboration with faculty?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we could use researchers. We have someone right now who does most of our writing. He's struggling with an article on inflation. So, we could use some research to help us. So if there are researchers, reach out to me or John Gugliana, and, we could probably use some interns to help us do some of this work. Not only is the survey important, we got to figure out what questions to put in the survey, but also answering questions from members of Congress is really important. And most of the things that we do are generated by those meetings with members of Congress, because that's our job, is to answer their questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll do that for sure. And I think one other message that I have, and I'll open the floor for other questions, but I think it's important for us to understand that politics is not a taboo matter. It's something that affects us on a daily basis. And so we have to be able to, talk to and speak with others about it in a way that, that it's respectful, like you mentioned, being able to advocate for what's important. And I think this is a really great reason for us to become active, and regardless of your politics, right? Making sure that family business is at the forefront of letting our representatives know what's important for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for advocacy. Obviously, I advocate for the Alzheimer's Association or Alzheimer's Orange County. If you believe in something, you really should be an advocate. It's so very important. As I keep saying, the laws and the rules in this country are changing every day. You want to be a voice, and people want to hear your voice. So you really should understand that it is important, and it is listened to. And I just encourage people to do that, to advocate for whatever they believe in.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Fernando and the Dean, for sponsoring this presentation today. And we hope to see you guys in the future at other events sponsored by the
Okay,
Institute
thank you
for Family
all.
Business.
Have a great day. Take care.
Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.